Joining us now are two commentators from the liberal side of the aisle. In New York, Rachel Maddow, host of the Rachel Maddow Show on Air America Radio. And here in Washington, Bill Press, who hosts the Bill Press Show on Sirius Satellite Radio. Bill Press, this was a bipartisan committee report from House Ethics. No rules were broken, and the media basically treating it as a whitewash. Is that justified?
I think it was a total cop-out. I mean, what gets me is they admitted that the leadership knew about Mark Foley. Maybe they didn't know the details of every email, but they knew he was having inappropriate contact with these House pages. They willfully, they decided not to do anything about it, and then they hold nobody responsible and take no action. And they release it on the Friday before they leave town, which is typical fashion when they have bad news at the White House or in the Congress. You know what I think? I think it proves that Congress is incapable of policing itself.
Rachel Maddow, I mean, clearly there was negligence and a lack of aggressiveness by many key Republicans. The report says that. But the press treated this whole thing as a huge scandal in the middle of the campaign. Looking back, was it overblown?
I don't think it was overblown. Mark Foley's conduct was very egregious, and as Tony Snow said in your interview with him, it's the kind of conduct that people are going to pay a lot of attention to in the news. There's a lot of appetite for learning more about that. The cover-up, if there was a cover-up in the House, and I think this ethics report says that effectively there was, is a political scandal, because everybody hearing about that in the Republican leadership in the House should have been as scandalized by the details of what Mark Foley was doing as we all were as the public when we found out about it. It seems like they're not operating in a normal business environment if they can get away with this, not be held responsible when they knew what he did just as we knew what he did.
Coming back to the coverage, the report also says that Democratic Congressman Rahm Emanuel knew 1 year ago about Foley's problems and took no action. Emanuel says he had only cursory knowledge. That doesn't seem to get as much attention from the media.
You know, I don't know about the Rahm Emanuel thing. I don't know the facts of Rahm Emanuel, but my feeling is anybody who knew about it should have gone to the ethics committee or should have gone to the police and reported this activity. But I must say, if Rahm Emanuel had done that a year ago, you know what, Republican leaders would accuse him of just being playing politics, and they wouldn't have done anything anyhow. This was a Republican problem.
Republican leaders said at the time that Democrats were responsible for peddling this story. There didn't seem to be any immediate evidence of that, but the House Ethics Report says that the communications director of the House Democratic Caucus got a hold of those emails, gave them to the St. Petersburg Times, Miami Herald, Roll Call, and Harper's Magazine, none of which published them. So, Rachel Maddow, it does seem like Democrats were trying to get this out for partisan reasons rather than going to authorities.
Well, there was, I mean, there was also the information, the emails, and the content of them was also passed on by nonpartisan groups to those emails, to those media outlets as well. What I think is interesting is the media side of this, is that all of those mainstream traditional media outlets didn't run with this story. It took its eruption in the blogosphere in order to make it into the story that then the mainstream media had to catch up to, even though they had first crack at it in terms of the information.
Even Brian Ross broke it first on his website rather than on television.
Right.
I want to turn now to the debate about Iraq and the Iraq Study Group. You know, the mainstream coverage of the Hamilton-Baker Commission has been that this was a great exercise in bipartisanship, very reasonable recommendations, and the only real question is President Bush sensible enough to do what they say? Let's take a look at some of the interviews that Baker and Hamilton, who were all over the Sunday shows this morning, as well as Late Edition, gave earlier in the week.
Do you believe this administration is really capable of admitting its failures and dramatically changing course?
Doesn't a lot of this require the president to do a 180 on more than one issue, some of his basic tenets?
What is your feeling, the sense, the odds that this one will be heard, this one will be acted upon?
You guys have both met with the president. What's your sense of his willingness to act on your recommendation?
Bill Press, have journalists fallen in love with this commission?
First of all, I got to say, I think the commission did, I know this is in your question, I think the commission did an outstanding job of getting its stuff out there, this report. I bought a copy of this report.
You've fallen in love. You even paid money for this.
No, I paid money for it. I bought a copy the day it was released in a bookstore in Asheville, North Carolina. I mean, they were on the job. But the other thing, look, the first question, I'm going to play a Tony Snow here, right? The president and Congress must act together. Well, we know the Congress wants to get out of Iraq. The key question about this whole thing is, Bush is the commander-in-chief. Will he listen to these recommendations? I think the media was asking the question, the key question that everybody has to ask, and we still don't know the answer.
Rachel Maddow, while the mainstream coverage was very respectful, to say the least, toward this commission and its elder statesman members, among the pundits, my scientific survey shows that the people on the right hated it and the people on the left didn't much like it either.
That's right. On the left, you don't like it because on the left, basically we see it as endorsing a permanent occupation of Iraq, if that's what some politician wants to do with these recommendations. On the right, they see it as not being able to conjure some sort of mythical win out of the dust in Iraq. Left and right don't like it. But what it is, and what I think the mainstream media is responding to appropriately, is that it is a political moment. It is a political opportunity. This is a chance. This is a political window of opportunity for a leader to step in and say, we're going to change course. Nobody left, right, or center thinks we ought to just keep doing what we're doing. The question is whether or not the president's going to find it within himself to actually say he wants to change. I think that would be a miracle along the order of a star over Bethlehem, but it might happen. He's going to give a speech.
Howie, I just got to say, Tony Snow, I think, and again in your interview, is making a big mistake in trying to present this report as nothing different from what the White House is doing, or no criticism of the White House's policy. It is a
He didn't say there was no criticism, but he did dismiss people like NBC's David Gregory for putting what he saw as a partisan spin on these findings, as if it was a complete rejection of everything the administration has done.
But that's outrageous. It is a disastrous indictment of the administration's policy, if you read it.
There you go again.
No, Tony Snow is trying to say black is white. This report says we got to get out by 2008. This report says you have to talk to Iran and Syria. This report says it's grave and deteriorating, and the White House tries to paint a happy picture on it. I think they just ought to say, Tony should say, these are good people, they did a lot of work, we disagree with them.
Rachel, what did you think of the screaming headline on the cover of the somewhat conservative New York Post, surrender monkeys, depicting Jim Baker and Lee Hamilton as baboons?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the New York Post, I never agree with them, but they do have some pretty specifically wonderful headline writers and people who put together their front page. I will give them credit for getting press of their own coverage.
Right.
But, I mean, what's interesting, I think, what's happening in political terms is that the right is trying to frame the Iraq Study Group report as liberal, is trying to frame it as the leftward edge of where we could go in terms of Iraq policy. Those of us in progressive media see the Iraq Study Group report, while repudiating Bush's policies, see it as really not going far enough. I mean, if I got to write that report, I would say that troops should be out now. We should treat it like a humanitarian and security crisis along the lines of Rwanda or Darfur, and stop treating this like a war at all.
I guess you weren't invited to be on the panel. Let me move ahead here.
Surprise.
Let me move ahead here because at the news conference that President Bush held with Prime Minister Tony Blair earlier in the week, what's been replayed a lot on various network newscasts are the questions not from Americans but from British and Irish reporters. Let's take a brief look at that.
Mr. President, the Iraq Study Group described the situation in Iraq as grave and deteriorating. You said that the increase in attacks is unsettling. That will convince many people that you're still in denial about how bad things are in Iraq and question your sincerity about changing course.
It's bad in Iraq. Does that help?
Are you capable of admitting your failures in the past? And perhaps much more importantly, are you capable of changing course, perhaps in the next few weeks?
Bill Press, aggressive or rude?
Perfectly aggressive. I'm sure Rachel did too. I replayed those clips on my own show, and I just said, this is what these reporters ought to be doing. And I also think it shows that flip, sarcastic side of George W. Bush when he's talking about the war in Iraq, which is an insult to all Americans.
Rachel Maddow, if American reporters ask questions in that sort of tone, that condescending tone, are you out of touch of reality, wouldn't they take a lot of heat?
Yes, they would absolutely take a lot of heat, and they'd probably have a real hard time at the next Tony Snow press briefing for having done it, I'm guessing. But what's, I think, interesting about those British and Irish questions is that you have seen in American policy toward Iraq that the American people have been ahead of even the press, and certainly ahead of leadership in Washington on this issue. The American people have wanted a withdrawal for a lot longer than even the Democratic Party was willing to endorse it. I think when you hear those English and Irish reporters asking questions, they're much more along the lines of where the American people are than the American press is, which has been very cowed on this issue.
All right, I have about a minute. I want to sneak in a political question for both of you. Barack Obama in New Hampshire today testing the waters for presidential race. Newsweek reports there's an 80% chance he may run, 99% for Hillary, according to insiders. Have you ever seen, Bill Prez, any political figure get the kind of glowing coverage that Barack Obama has gotten in the last few months?
Not since John McCain in the year 2000. I think there's a perfect parallel there. Barack Obama's a new face, he's a new voice, and
he's been in office 2 years.
I know, he's walking on water. I am one who has been drinking the Barack Obama Kool-Aid, and go Barack Obama. That's all I got to say.
And why doesn't Hillary Clinton get the same kind of, why does she get much more critical coverage than Obama, in your view, Rachel?
Well, two reasons. One, we've known her for longer than 2 years. and two, I mean, you can't discount the fact that there has been a really deliberate, really advanced, a really long-standing right-wing smear campaign to make Hillary Clinton into the boogeyman of all liberal values. And so that stuff, even if it's not reflected directly in mainstream media, it does have an effect.
It's a great topic for the next 27 Reliable Sources shows. Rachel Maddow, Bill Press, thanks very much for joining us this morning.